All right. Welcome to today's community conversation. My name is Sean Hurley. I'll be your community host. We're joined by the talented Jacob Small and special guest John Pierson. This is discussing Dynamo and generative design. Next, please. Oh, yeah, there we go. Second one for the day, Jacob. I'm sorry. Community conversations are virtual meetups featuring expert speakers from across the community. Sessions range from deep dives, tips and tricks, live demonstrations on products such as AutoCAD, Revit, and Dynamo, industry insights, emerging trends, roundtables, career stories, and more, all levels. We'll start indicating those on the calendar soon, what levels they are. Next, please. The fun lawyer stuff. This just simply says, don't make any purchasing decisions based on anything we say that isn't in the shipping product. Kind of complicated way of saying, just trust the shipping product. If we say something crazy is coming in the future, don't rely on it. Yeah, and I like that one. Don't listen to John, from John. John, take everything he says with a grain of salt. No, I'm kidding. Next, please. Some ground rules or norms. Lines are muted to reduce the background noise, but we do invite you to turn on your camera where possible. Kind of gives us that in-person meeting feeling. We saw a dog in the last one. Hey, Aaron. Raise your hand using the little Zoom function in the bottom right, and we'll call on you to unmute, or you can post your question into the chat. This is a conversation, so we do take questions and relevant details and commentary and suggestions, all that good stuff. The session will be recorded. It will not be emailed to you in a link, as that needs to be updated on the slide, but it will be on the event page as well as the YouTube Dynamo playlist, and I will provide that link later on where you can stay up to date. We are on number 34 sessions. So next, please. Again, I'm Sean Hurley. I'm Autodesk Community Engagement Manager. I am a geeky technologist located on the sunny side of the Cascades in Bend, Oregon.
And my name is Jacob Small. I am a technical consultant at Autodesk. I describe myself as a Dynamo form junkie. That's where I got my start with Dynamo, where I learned what I know, and where I continue to do a lot of my self-education today.
And Saul's on vacation and I'm here. My name is John Pierson. I'm a design technology specialist at Parallax team, and I build a whole bunch of Dynamo packages, and I also hang out on the forums quite a bit like Jacob, and yeah, just a Dynamo fanatic and love being part of this community. So thank you guys for having me on this too.
All right, so welcome to the Dynamo office hours. This is the 34th session using generative design. And this is really all about kind of what it takes to really get started with generative. So as always, we're going to start with kind of our usual sort of 20-minute sort of introduction and talk about some of the key topics and things to know, followed by a live demonstration from John this week. Really excited for that before we get into Q&A. And as always, feel free to put stuff in the chat. We'll try to keep a conversation going back and forth there, as well as bring stuff up as it's relevant when we get into the actual slides. All right, so let's start by asking, what is generative design? Well, generative design is actually, there's two different types. There's the product and there's sort of the verb. Generative design itself, in terms of the product app, is an actual application to utilize the verb generative design, which takes advantage of the computational design approach with sort of some individual distinctions. The intent here is to have the designer start to define goals to achieve the outcomes that they want, rather than focus on the individual many decisions that they have to make over the course of a product. Focus instead on what it is that you're after. The computer then helps the designer to sort of explore that design space by generating multiple design options, not just one. The computer or the application then allows the designer to sort of find a set of optimal solutions that satisfy their competing goals, so that we're sort of looking at what it is that we're really after. This one achieves that well, or this solution, this design achieves that well. These ones don't, so let's set those aside. Maybe there's something we can learn from them later, but I want to play around with these for now. The designer then basically gets to compare all those different scenarios to find a set of design options that sort of meets those goals and then continue along the design process. Equally important in terms of what generative design is who should be utilizing generative design. After all, our accountants seem pretty confused by this when we introduced it to them, and they really, really, really like Excel. So anybody who has one or more of the following sort of scenarios in front of them might want to consider generative design for their particular application. So if you have a wicked problem, what I mean by a wicked problem, that's not my Boston poking through, that's a legitimate term. It basically means a term which has no real one solution. There's too many things that are changing constantly and consistently. It's too objective, and you can't really just say, here's the way the puzzle goes together. Also, in cases where you have no clear optimal solution, if there is no one way for things to sort of work out. After that, there's places where you sort of need to make a bunch of decisions and sort of get to that end result to sort of have a review of exactly what it is that you're after. Did this work out? You've got to make 50 different decisions and go through all these other processes before we can really find out. Generative can certainly help there. If you have or can write a Dynamo file to sort of solve the problem, that's definitely a good implication that generative design might be something to look into. If you have a defined goal in mind, if you're not sure what you're really after, you can sort of run through there. And also if you can sort of define variables to alter those outcomes and quantify the result, right? Now, equally important, and as Aaron noted, Autodesk does not recommend elephants using generative design. Typically, we find they break the mice, but the key piece here is you don't want to use generative design when there's clearly no solution for it or the solution is very, very clear, right? So if you can look, the elephant does not belong in the living room is more what that's getting after. There is no way that we're going to be able to configure the living room and the elephant to make this work. Therefore, that's not ideal, but generative design might be more ideal for sort of solving the best path through that maze. Some common titles for people who utilize generative design: designers, architects, engineers, planners, basically people in AEC of all walks and shapes. So why in particular should we be utilizing generative design? Well, one, it's going to sort of help inform to make sure that you've got some of the better outcomes that you're after. It lets you sort of focus on what you want to achieve rather than the minutia up front. Where's the best spot for the reception desk? Not necessarily as important as where's this best spot for the reception area up front, right? It's also going to allow you to sort of make faster, more informed decisions because you're going to sort of understand what's coming along down the pipe as opposed to just what's right in front of you today. It's going to give you a greater variety of options because you're going to be reviewing thousands of options with quantifiable results as opposed to just lines on trace to sort of make those decisions in terms of which one you want to work with. And it's also going to sort of enable a new collaborative approach. It's a new tool inside the designer's tool set where you're sort of collaborating with the computer as opposed to sort of trying to replace the designer. And that's a key piece here. We don't want to sort of position generative design as a way to say, hey, we don't need designers anymore because the tool's doing it for us. No, we still have to make the decisions. We still have to utilize our intuition. We're just helping you get there a little bit quicker and again, focus on that outcome. All right, John, over to you.
Awesome. So I come in here to where I just want to talk about a bit of where to start. So I guess a little bit of background. So generative design isn't something that I've been using for years. I am a Dynamo user first and a Revit user, but it is a tool that's given to us on the ribbon. It showed up. You might not have wanted it. You might not have asked for it, but it's on the ribbon. So you might as well use it. We'll link to after this. There are a series of blog posts that I've been working on with the team, with the generative design team, about practical use cases. So if you've seen me present before, I'm kind of pretty blunt with my feedback a lot of the time. And when I started seeing generative design being presented back at Autodesk University 2019, 2018, you just see buildings and stuff flying around and massing happen and really cool, but that's all I kept seeing. And I'm like, well, we have clients who lay out offices, so this office one's a good point for that. We have people who lay out sheets all day, and that sucks. How can we use it for that? So that's kind of where I come in, as I try to think of it on a more practical side. Today we'll probably just go through how to upgrade an existing graph to generative design in Revit 2023. So if you have a Dynamo Player graph, if you created a Dynamo Player graph, raise your hand. What we're going to check, but you can put it in the chat too. You probably can create a generative design graph as well. So that's kind of the thought process here. So I'll show a live demo here in a second. Next slide. I can't remember what slides I put, but oh yeah. So the big thing I want you to take from this presentation, if anything, is, and you can change the slide, generative design is not magic. It requires you to build out the logic with Dynamo. So that's the other thing I'm fairly critical of, and it's always with the utmost respect. I'm not just a jerk, you know. But generative design is often shown with those images like we saw previously where stuff's moving and it's all, ooh, cool, it's just doing the thing. I've had clients who are like, make the generative design, you do it. And I'm like, what do you mean make the generative design do it? Like, what's that mean? You tell me what you think that means. You need to build the instructions for it, and that's through Dynamo as the set of instructions. The team is really great to where they included sample files that are really nice to deconstruct for you to see how they work, because there are a few weird things in generative design that you don't have to worry about in Dynamo. Next slide. Live demo. Okay, cool. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll look at a few things here.
Yeah, well, John sets up his screen share. I definitely want to reiterate, it's not magic. There is work and effort that has to go into building those graphs. And you do have to have a good solid foundation of what you can do with Dynamo to really get going with it. So,
But we are working on a John Pierson robot, correct?
Yeah,
Or is that still confidential?
that was confidential. Make no purchasing decisions.
Yeah.
Exactly. There we go. The lawyers.
Let's see. All right, so we should see Revit, and this is a top secret project that I just built for this presentation. So yeah. So let's see. I already ran it. So yeah. This is a Dynamo Player graph that was made for Dynamo Player. And this is Dynamo Player in Revit 2023. If there's one reason you should upgrade to Revit 2023, Dynamo Player is the reason. It's awesome. It's received its first update since like Revit 2018, I think, when they gave us inputs. So I highly encourage you to check that out. If you're on Revit 2023, raise your hand in the chat or whatever too. But the Dynamo Player stuff's magnificent. And Dynamo 2.12 added a lot of these features. So this description on my graph was able to be added in Dynamo 2.12, but it didn't seem like it did anything. Those are under graph properties. So if you're in Revit 2022, you can start adding these right now. The image, this thumbnail, is also in Dynamo 2.12 for Revit 2022, and it serializes in your Dynamo file as base64. I was looking at Jacob, but it came to me, so I always have to ask him for that one because I'm like, what is it again? But yeah, it serializes it. So I'll hit the little pencil icon and we could take a look at that real quick. I know this is a generative design session, so we'll get into that too, but I want to kind of highlight that. So under extensions, graph properties, that's where you add this data. So you add your planting placement, your description, author name, and a learn more URL. That learn more URL is awesome because you can now link to a tutorial video for your Dynamo graph or a page on your company intranet, or I think you can embed a PDF file as a URL, all sorts of different things for people to know how to use these things. Document your Dynamo graphs, whether that be for regular Dynamo, Dynamo Player, generative design, whatever it may be, document them. If you don't, you're just kind of a jerk and you don't care about your end users, so do it. But yeah, this is a Dynamo Player graph. So what we'll do, another new feature in Revit 23 is you can leave it open, Dynamo with Dynamo Player, and run them, and they update automatically, which is pretty nice. I am going to close Dynamo because my last session right before this, I had no crashes, and I want to keep that record going. So yeah, this graph will actually let you pick a face of a host surface that's temporary. I call these like temporary objects. You given some parameters, you can run this and it will create a density of planting laid out for us. This is available on the Dynamo blog. So if you go to the Dynamo blog and you click on like my name, all these graphs are available with the data sets already, as well as a write-up that's very, very thorough for these. So be sure to check that out too. But yeah, this is really cool. This graph works pretty well. I can slide things, all this good stuff, right? I have to undo each time because Dynamo Player does not have element binding. So these things would keep getting created if I kept hitting run. So if I hit run again, I'd create more. That's another thing with Dynamo Player that you have to keep in mind. So we'll hit undo. The thing with this graph, so this was made to show some of the new features in Dynamo Player. So the thing with this graph was it'd be nice if we can actually optimize something in generative design. So you have a few different options when it comes to creating these studies and everything like that, is you can either do it through randomization or you can do it through optimization. Optimization is nice because we can optimize for something like surface area coverage of that planting or something like that. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's see. I didn't start a timer, but this is through the end of the hour, correct?
You've got 40-ish minutes, yeah.
Oh man. All right, here we go. So we're not going to show generative, no, I'm just kidding. So we'll open up Dynamo here from the Manage tab. I asked this in my last session too, but can anyone tell us when it moved to the Manage tab? What year of Revit? Put it in the chat. You will win Monocle for free if you get it right. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to open my graph. So I have a begin graph, Dynamo Player to Generative Design, in this folder. I always, when I'm working on upgrading something to the latest version, I always try to remember to run in manual execution mode. That helps you be able to mitigate issues if something should occur. So let's see. This is what it looks like when you open a graph that you upgrade from a previous version of Revit. Things overlap, all that good stuff. And this is all of the guts of that Dynamo Player graph, placing all those plants. Pretty cool if you ask me. It's using a new node in Dynamo for Revit that lets you isolate categories by selection. And Dynamo Player lets you order inputs now by the name. So if you put 01, 02, 03, you kind of start to tell your user what story or what journey they need to go on to use your graph, which is pretty cool. Workspace references, been in Dynamo for a little while, but it's even better these days to where now it doesn't, first of all, it looks nicer. Before it was just like some random grid, and now it actually works. So you can actually resolve dependencies and say, I want to use the latest version of, in this case, Rhythm, and kind of go from there. We're going to do a save as. We're going to name this in progress, maybe. And we'll hit save. Awesome. So there we go. We're going to close workspace references because we're done with it. And we do want to clean up the spacing a bit. So I'm going to show this. It's in Monocle. If you go to Graph Resizer, you can actually hit run and it will resize your graph and spread things out a bit. That was probably too big of a resize, but oh well, it's all right. These graphs are available on the blog for you to be able to use. Awesome. So what we're going to do is we need to first tell Dynamo that this is a generative design graph now. It's no longer just for Dynamo Player. We want to do more with it. We want to start to make this thing interact and optimize things as well. And let's see. Man, I did space that out a lot. So the first step that we need to do is we need to go to extensions and go to graph status. This is a pretty new feature too that's been in the generative design extension for Revit since Revit 22, I believe. And what you're essentially able to do is say, this graph is now a generative design graph. By clicking that, you get a whole bunch of pop-ups. This feature, if this were added in generative design when it first came out, I think we would have had more adoption really fast. And that's because like this helps guide you so well. It's really awesome. And what it does is it starts to tell you what you're missing. So in the case of generative design, it runs 4 instances of Dynamo in the background while it's optimizing or randomizing or something like that. You can actually see that in your task manager if you run it while running generative design. So that's how it helps optimize things so well, which is really cool. I wish we could do that with Dynamo to where we just fire off 4 instances, let it solve and come back. That'd be pretty cool. but it does that for generative design. With that in mind, it doesn't know what a Revit face is. It has no idea that that's from a Revit floor. So we need to actually do something called serializing that geometry. And the way that that is done is through a node called remember. So the funny story about remember nodes is no one remembered to place them. So they had to build this to help us remember. So that will actually cache the geometry. So I can now open this graph even in Dynamo Sandbox and see that surface and start to work with it, which is really nice. So that placed for me. We'll need another one. It's not perfect. I'll just, full disclosure, I'll just be completely honest with you, because it's wanting me to remember this element type, which is the planting type. But if I were to do that, we will see if I hit run, that remember node's like, hey, we can't store a family type. So naturally I'm like, well, why did you offer, but it just doesn't know that, unfortunately. It just knows that there's something here that you as the end user need to target. So what we could do is we'll remove these from the group. Yeah, we'll remove those from that group, and we just need to solve this a little bit different. So these are family types for trees that I picked. That way we can place them on that surface. In Revit, we have options here, or in Dynamo rather, we have options here to be able to extract data from elements. So in Revit, everything has a base class of element. And in that base class, we have access to things like their ID, their category, and their unique ID. In Revit, an ID for an element is like its driver's license number. That could change given certain scenarios. So if you recreate a central file, sometimes element IDs can change or things like that. A unique ID is like your social. It won't change, or at least it's not supposed to. I kind of hesitate to ever say anything's absolute because a lot of people have given me trust issues when I ask them what their requirements are for their Dynamo graph, and they say it will always be named Japanese cherry tree with an initial capital, and then it's not. So I hesitate to say always. So what we'll do is we'll place this unique ID. This takes an element, and it outputs a string. It's going to break the rest of the graph, but that remember node is able to serialize text or strings, which is really nice. So that's something that's very, very useful to know and to do. Awesome. So that kind of is how that works. The next step in this graph is you can't have all these elements working inside of the loop for generative design. So you need to kind of retrieve these in a way. And I've created, I think I always talk about these almost in every presentation anymore, dictionaries. Dictionaries are a great way to look things up, and specifically for generative design, it's a good way to get yourself out of that loop. So if you've ever tried to use generative design and it says the data cannot be in the evaluation loop, it's telling you that you're feeding this stuff in and trying to change it. Dictionaries are great for modifying that data. Dictionaries are in the library under the dictionary category. Use these. Don't use the ones from No Hard Feelings to any of the package authors, because now these are out of the box. Don't use the ones in Lunchbox because these are just out of the box now. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and create a dictionary given a string of keys to look something up by, and a series of values, which could be pretty much anything. It could be nested lists. I use these a lot for room lookup. So a room name with all of its contents as a nested list is a really great use of a dictionary. But we can store family types. So there we go. And we'll hit run. And we'll see that now I have one less issue in my graph already. And we have those being able to be looked up by their unique ID, and it gets their family type. So given a unique ID now, we can do value at key, get a dictionary, get that key. I'm finding on Windows 11 that some of the hit testing on these wires is a little off. Kind of interesting. And we got that by its unique ID very quickly, which is nice. So there's that for that portion of the lookup. There are a whole lot of other things. to get all this geometry. We'll build out all we can, but in the event I get too close to time, I'll just open the finished one. But we'll go ahead and keep on building these out. The other part of this graph is for generative design, it's nice to see visualization in the viewport. For Dynamo Player, I'm creating those elements on the fly and seeing those trees and hitting undo. In regards to generative design, we need to build that as well. So not only do you need to build the Dynamo graph, you need to build the interaction for your end user to be able to see how this works. I guess I can go ahead and open. This is a new machine. I'm going to bet I don't have that run, so we'll open that here in a second. But in generative design, it's very similar to Dynamo Player, and my chat is covering that, to where you would build your visualization out in this folder. So what we'll do is we'll map another folder. Cool. Navigate to that folder, and now we have it. So this is picking up the graph that's in progress right now. So that's kind of why we have some of that error. So that's what we're building out right now. Hello. There we go. Freaking me out. The fan's kicking off. I'm like, oh man. So for geometry, a lot of times in Dynamo, you can do element.geometry and obtain a whole bunch of different geometry from these things. So in this case, we would obtain geometry from the source elements that I'm picking. This graph specifically works by selecting existing plants instances in the model. So what we'll do is we'll hold down Control to copy an input port, hit Run, and we'll see that we have 7 meshes off to the side, or however many I have selected. So those are the plants that I picked for this operation. So that's pretty nice, except for their meshes, which isn't as nice, but it's okay, we can work with it. And that would give me some visualization. Out of the box, Dynamo doesn't offer any mesh visualization options, which is kind of a bummer, but we can work around that with packages. So what we'll go ahead and do is we need to cache this. These are all new things because in Dynamo Player, you don't need to have geometry showing because you're working in the Revit model. And we're going to cache that geometry as well. If I weren't to place that, this tool, this extension would have helped me with that as well. So that's something else to always keep in mind. Cool, we're going to go ahead and flatten this list because I don't want to work with a whole crazy list. Awesome. These alignment commands are in Monocle. Those aren't out of the box. So if you're curious about that, get Monocle for those. That was born out of my frustration with having to align things like this. Edit, align, top. So I just added it in Canvas and gave it to everyone. So get that way you can clean up your graphs as you work on them. A tool that allows us to color meshes in Dynamo is called the Mesh Toolkit from the Dynamo team. It is a must-have package if you're working with meshes. So if you're working with these RPC components, if you're working with topography, if you're working with 3D printing things, Mesh Toolkit's a must-have. So I highly encourage you to get that. The downside with Mesh Toolkit is you're able to build meshes from geometry, but not from meshes that are out of the box Dynamo meshes. Thankfully, the awesome Dynamo community has solutions for that. So we have mesh.to.tk-mesh, which is toolkit mesh. This is from the Spring Nodes package, which is made by Dimitar. He is awesome, and he made this for us, and it solved a serious pain point specifically for this workflow as well. It's been in his package for a while, and what it does is it essentially just converts those meshes to a Dynamo toolkit mesh. This really should be in Mesh Toolkit, so point of feedback, but it's in Spring Nodes, so we're good to go. We need to convert it because we want to be able to colorize that thing by using another dictionary. So that's kind of where this gets a little bit crazy. In addition to starting to place on all these points, we need to have the location for these things as well. So we have to translate these around. This workflow is pretty involved. Like I mentioned on the blog post, we break it down step by step, but it is worth kind of noting some of these little things that we have to consider. So in order to move an element around, we have to get its location. So we're going to copy that location, and now we'll see those locations should be under those planting families. So these are my like source ones. So I'll leave them on for now in the preview. The other thing that we need to be able to start to calculate the coverage area is the bounding box. Reason being, these are meshes. I had the option of, when I was working on this workflow, of making trees that were real geometry, and given if I were in charge of like the content, I would probably make real geometry. But this was a workflow that's kind of showing what can be done with the things that are included. These are meshes in Revit, so we wanted to kind of show how to do that. So we do need to get the bounding box. In Revit, everything in Revit has a bounding box. And the bounding box typically looks something like this. Let's see. We're going to draw it as bad as I can. It's called axis align, so all of this would be considered the bounding box of that element. In this case, those trees, that's a nice rough estimate of what their coverage area is in this case. So that's kind of one of the things that we're able to do. All right. So if we were to type in bounding box, we have a few options in here, and there should be an element dot bounding box. And it's that one. Once again, control copy. We'll run it, and we have all the bounding boxes for those elements to start to calculate that coverage area for us, which is nice. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and convert these to a cube. That way I can actually see the darn thing and do some differences. And that's roughly the area that those trees and things are covering. I think we can all kind of say, right? So yeah, what we would do is we're actually going to build a dictionary that looks up all of this data that we work so hard to build just as a dictionary. Traditionally, like in the past, we've done this to where you reuse the node over and over. So if you find yourself like down the line getting the element type, and you're like, oh, I gotta get the mesh again. You messed up. So like try to use dictionaries if you can and minimize that data that you're having to push around. If you're sitting there and your Dynamo's thinking and you see, all right, so tangent here. If I ever have to evaluate someone's graph because they're like, hey, it's going slow, can you help me? And it looks like this. I look at it from a very zoomed out point of view. And I'm like, well, first of all those little copies need to get fixed somehow. That's why it's slow. So that sounds a little harsh, I know. But if you find yourself copying things, it definitely is going to slow you down. I always use the analogy that, like, let's say you want to eat a slice of pizza. It's lunchtime here. I'm hungry, so I'm thinking of food. And in order to decide how much pizza you want, 1 or 2 or 3 slices, you eat the whole pizza, and then you're like, I should have ate 3. And you keep doing that. That's what copying tons of nodes is like eating the whole darn pizza over and over to find out what you actually needed. So try to minimize some of that if you can. Tangent over, right? All right, so dictionaries, and Jacob's posting some good info about dictionaries as well. We can actually build one by just copying that over. And the data that we're going to use is actually already serialized over here in this remember node. So we can plug that in as the key. We're going to reuse that key, and we're going to combine all this data. You can either search for a list create node to combine this, or if you have Monocle installed, you can pick all the nodes and hit this little shopping cart, and that combines them for you. Those are now our values. So I mentioned nested list earlier, and I'm gonna bet I didn't grab. Oh, haha, we have to transpose this. That's covered in the blog post as to why. Essentially, these lists aren't joined per object right now. I'm cheating and have my graph open on the other screen. And I have several of those same trees selected, evidently. So I need to add a unique items to this graph. So if you have several of the same family type selected, you need to isolate that down a bit more. And if it acts up much more, we're opening the existing graph because I don't want to fight with it. Wrong unique items. No one told me.
Put the unique after the element type, yeah.
Yep. You got me. There we go. this is not being clean while I'm working, so I'll end up opening the complete one anyway. But we now have those dictionaries as sublists, and their lookup ID is that unique item. So that's really nice for this kind of interaction. Cool. That's now our dictionary that we can look up. And what we essentially want to do is create a randomized list of these things to be able to figure out what we want to do with them. So in this case, we would end up cycling all of these items several times and be able to iterate through them. So cycle is a really nice node for this. So we did mention that we want to randomize some of this selection. So I would end up just cycling these nodes a ton of times, and that would be through this randomization as well. So we do want that to cycle to be able to pick from this list quite a bit. And that's a whole lot of plants to choose from now. So we can start to choose from all these plants to create all of those items. So in the case of this dictionary, I can now use these unique IDs to be able to pull that data pretty quickly. The randomization seed in Revit 2023, we have a shuffle with a seed. Really, really awesome. So now you can actually have that iterate through for generative design. This used to be available only in the Refinery Toolkits package, and now it's available to us for generative design. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the amount of plants that we're actually going to use, and that ensures that we have a randomized value in here of plants as well. Let's see, I'm just going to open the complete, but those dictionaries let us build up those nested lists quite a bit. So let's open the complete one and navigate through it just real quick. And I'll cover at least discussing some of the different things in there. So we'll run it. That dictionary that I was just building is right here. Those randomizations are right here. The dictionary being used is right here to where we can get the mesh, the location, and the bounding box. And then we're subtracting all that from the floor now. So that's what we're going to optimize against. In order to optimize, we are just doing some math in here for our fitness function. So a fitness function is something to optimize against. So what we're doing is getting the surface area, taking all those bounding boxes, and giving us a percentage of coverage. So that's kind of what this part's doing. So in regards to what's changed from Dynamo Player to Generative Design, it is pretty significant, but it's basically this portion right here to add. I would argue that that's not that bad. That's about 20 nodes, and what it does is pretty awesome. So yeah, that should be good. The additional nodes that we need to add is we don't want Generative Design trying to create elements over and over. It won't even let you. But we need to kind of block that with this little bit of a switch node. So you will see that this did not run yet in Revit because of that blocker right there. So what we'll do is we'll hit save, and let's make sure our graph is marked as generative design. We have no issues, so we're good. And hit run and save one more time because I have trust issues with it, as mentioned. And now our generative design study is available to us. So very similar to Dynamo Player, we could pick this thing, and it will take us to where there are inputs for us to use. So in this case, let's go ahead and let that fire it up. We know that we want to optimize this workflow, and I need to pick a host face. So we can hit select in Revit. All those descriptions are from the new features in Revit 23 and Dynamo 2.13 to where we can add descriptions. And I need to tell it which parameters it's allowed to modify to start to try to optimize something. So I'm going to let it optimize how dense this is, the amount of plants it can use, and actually I want to tell it how many plants I can use. And we're going to let it run through randomization. So let's say I have 40 plants that I want to place. I know I can place 40. Somehow my budget's for 40. I don't know. And I want to maximize the coverage percentage. So give me the ones that make most sense for this area. So that'll be my goal. And then if I set this lower, I think this will run pretty quick actually. So you hit generate, and like mentioned earlier, it starts firing off those Dynamo instances in the background. So we will have in here Dynamo core runtime. We'll have 4 instances of that running for us. So let's see. Or generative solver.
REST Dynamo core, I think.
Why is it called REST? What the heck? Where is it? It's probably at the
Go
top.
all the way back up to the top and expand out.
There it is.
Yeah.
So, oh, that's 6 of them.
6 of them, yeah. So most modern
That's
computers have
changed.
8 processors. Modern computers having 8 processors means we want to leave 1 free for the server and 1 free for everything else. So the team grabs 6 and says, we're going to use all these, whether you like it or not.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I just learned something. So yeah, it fires all those up in the background, which is really nice because traditionally in Revit and Dynamo, we are kind of limited. So this is really nice that it starts to fire those things off for us, which is pretty cool. So I'll go ahead and close this and we'll let it keep running. But what it's doing is it's sliding all those sliders for me now a lot faster than I could. And it's actually going to give me feedback from those sliders, which is really cool. And this is using real Revit elements that I have placed in my model. It's using a real floor that I have placed off to the side. And I'm able to start to preview these results in the viewport as well, even though they're meshes because of Mesh Toolkit, which is really cool. So that's kind of the really neat thing with this workflow at this point is we are able to do that. It has created one solution so far, but as it starts to create more, we'll have different options in here for coverage percentage, and we can pick the one that's the highest if that's what we're targeting. You can also add things like cost in here, which are really nice. So let's say you have a certain budget for this thing, you can do that. One of my favorite workflows is the viewport placement script. So that's on the blog as well. It's probably in the next page or something. I don't know. There is one on there for that as well to be able to start to lay out viewports and optimize the white space on the sheet as well. There's another one in there for creating camera location placement based on a real Revit element and using the VASA package to be able to check that out as well. So things that traditionally use real Revit elements are kind of where I like work within a lot. And this was kind of one of those as well. We have 2 now. It looks like 2 runs complete. So we'll see kind of what happens. This is on optimize, so it might just return the most optimized because it's only optimizing for a single objective, which is coverage.
Yeah.
So what we can do is I think we can pause this.
Yeah, it's going to have to finish up the run that it's
Alrighty.
currently on, but it'll get there. There we go.
So we paused it. I picked this one. I can preview it. And what happens with that gate node now in Generative Design is if I hit Create Revit Elements, it opens it. And then it lets it place all those elements based on that logic in the Dynamo graph, which is really nice. Or at least it should. It's not going to work live on the call. I bet you. That's very weird.
I think it might need the run to run all the way through.
Okay. But yeah, so that create Revit elements will open the gate for you to be able to create those elements. Given that, you can also just take these values in Dynamo Player, type those in, and then you'll have that solution as well in Dynamo Player. Yeah, that's kind of, I didn't realize that it would need the run completed, so that's one kind of consideration. I should have picked lower values.
You could pause it again and do just a randomization study and grab one of those.
Let's see.
10 minutes to spare, easy.
Man. We're gonna run Dynamo Player at the same time. The other thing with this graph that's really nice is it does allow for randomization, which is pretty cool. So you can just tell it to randomize the randomization seed if you just want to get a whole bunch of different options from that. So if I go ahead and I put this down to like 10, that'll run faster, I imagine, right? Pick the face, generate. And now that one should run a little bit quicker. Like I said, given if you encounter issues a lot of the time, one thing that I've mentioned as well is like there's not really a debugger for generative design. It kind of runs. So that's been feedback that I've kind of supplied a few times. With Dynamo, though, you can debug it with it open. So the fact that these graphs now cross Dynamo Player, Dynamo full UI, and generative design is really nice because it's not so like mystical now. Now you don't have to specifically have a like copied version for generative design. So that's one thing that I've really liked about the tool is I can just toggle that graph status off from generative design, run the tool, and kind of debug it that way. So that's been kind of a help for that pain point as well, for those kind of things in there. Meshes are heavy in Revit and Dynamo, so that's also another thing that contributes to this workflow being a little bit heavier. But I wanted to be as realistic as I could with it because if you're working with like planting, you're probably working with meshes for better or worse, you know. Yeah, it's already finished 4 of them, so that should finish up here in a second. I haven't seen any questions popped in. I don't know if anyone else has. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat now while this is running. Cool. 2 more. It's exciting watching this. The other thing with generative design is you typically don't sit here and watch it. You can go and do something else while it runs, which is nice, given you have the hardware to do it. So let's kind of see if this works now. If it doesn't, then I need to troubleshoot it some more. But it should place those elements given opening that gate. Yeah, something changed with my point placement, so that kind of stinks. That's always fun. Because it does work in Dynamo Player, so that's what's a bummer. If I were to select the surface and run it, it was working earlier. Oh, the gate's closed in Dynamo Player, so that's not going to work either. Fun times. So that's the one thing is that gate you will have to make sure you open and close it depending on what you're debugging. Dynamo Player is really nice because it can stay open now along with Dynamo for these workflows, so I really like that a lot. But I guess like to kind of button all that up a bit, if you've been hesitant about trying generative design, some of these improvements that the team has made have kind of lowered that barrier quite a bit with the extension that shows you what to add and all that good stuff. So I really think like you can start to lay these things out really well as well. Yeah, that node has changed somehow to where it does not like.
What's the data input?
It's something changed with my element type. So if we do that, that's going to fix it. I was trying to place more instances evidently. So that was something that changed with my dictionary that I didn't count on. So that's kind of funny. Oh, we'll have to close the gate, hit run, hit save. And yeah, so I didn't extract the element type. So that was my fault. But you would just need to make sure that you're placing that given the node's inputs. But you'd get something like that, and then you can even bake that into a design option. So if you were running this in generative design, you can actually run it within a design option, which a lot of people don't know as well. So that's really cool when you're doing these kind of workflows is you just activate your design option and you can run those really quickly within that. Because if we're just generating a bunch of stuff and it only ever lives in that window that we saw for generative design, that's like not ideal. So you just kind of use Revit in some of the ways that Revit has strengths. So you might not like design options, but if you just want to throw some stuff in your model, you can do that as well, which is pretty nice. Let's see. No questions about generative design, huh?
I'll put one out there for you. What other sort of things besides coverage area might you sort of, or have you been asked about leveraging your tree placement graph on?
Yeah, so one comment came up when we built this one was regarding shading. So once again, meshes, kind of hard. But given solar analysis for Dynamo runs in generative design nowadays, that would be super doable. So shading and things like that are really nice to include. Cost is always a thing that people think about as well. So you can associate cost to the actual parameters of these elements. So instead of just leaving it just in Dynamo, you can actually add the cost to the type parameters and whatnot and account for that. So that's another option given how cost changes and things like that. You can generate options in that way. This can apply to any number of elements though too. So like I've even just used this kind of workflow for rendering purposes. I need to create like a whole crowd of people. I can do that really quickly. And I did fix that node. So now if we were to go in, we can start exploring all those options and put them in design options and whatnot. You would have to undo that last one before you place the next one though. So that's kind of one consideration. But that create Revit elements opens that gate for you. And the extension in Dynamo really helps you with that. But yeah, you can add cost to these things and all that good stuff. Other optimization workflows that I've done are like the panel situation. Given constraints of maximum cut length or minimum cut length for like fiber cement panels, you can start to optimize for that too, which is really cool. Some of the stuff that's boring is like packing sheets or moving around room tags to not clash with stuff. That stuff's cool to me because those are the things that a lot of designers spend a lot of time working on. So like tagging rooms and all this, like that is so like mundane. And then like you go into like an annotate tag all situation in Revit and it just does whatever the hell it wants, you know? So like with generative design, you can start to get those bounding boxes and flex them around and move them. So there's another blog post for that as well on the blog, and it's for on the Dynamo blog that Shan included earlier as well, is to be able to move room tags around using DynaShape, which is kind of wild. That one was kind of fun because we normally see that with tensile structures and things like that. Yeah, it's in here somewhere. Laying out sheets we have, and it takes viewports on the left and it'll actually iterate and place them off to the right. Given the bottom left corner of the sheet, the previous iteration of this workflow threw them on the sheet however the heck they wanted. This one uses logic based on how you would lay out the sheet as a designer. So pretty cool. Yeah, I think that's kind of my time for my example. So I'll drop off sharing. It is, right?
Yeah, we're in the home stretch here. So I did want to put some sort of rehash some of these links, and I saw Sean put one thing in the chat. I'm going to put a whole bunch more after him, so he might want to repaste that link that he had in there. But here it all comes, everybody. These are all the handy links I pass out to everybody, and we will put this up on a PDF somewhere for people to be able to grab as well. But effectively, if you want to get started with generative design or you want to learn some information on Dynamo, it's all right there. We've got the basic generative design info at autodesk.com/campaign/refinery-beta, self-guided generative design primer at generativedesign.org. If you want to provide some feedback to the development team, you can get involved with them at feedback.autodesk.com/key/refinery-landing. Dynamo Primer, as always, at primer.dynamobim.org. As we noted last week, there is a new primer out for Dynamo 2.13 and beyond that covers the new nodes. That's at primer2.dynamobim.org. It's not in the list of links yet because not everybody's on 2.13 yet, but I'll get it in there soon. And then if you want to get involved with the community, that's at forum.dynamobim.com. All right, so we'll skip over the rest of those just in the interest of time. We're out of time for questions, so we'll just barrel right on past that and let's talk about what we've got coming up. So our next conversation scheduled is September 1st. That's going to be authoring generative design tools with Sol, myself, and Lily Smith from the generative design team, which is going to be really good to have her in there. And then we're going to have one more on authoring of generative design tools with that same group coming up. John is still sharing.
Yeah,
Didn't know we could
Zoom froze.
Awesome.
And I cannot unshare right now, so that's fun.
Okay. Well, we'll hopefully people can see my screen as well. If not, maybe we'll edit this video before we post it to the YouTube. All right.
I went to stop sharing, the whole thing went gray.
You seemed a little still for a minute there.
Yeah, I looked and the whole thing turned gray, and it's like you can't stop sharing, and I'm like, and then my whole machine just froze, and I guess you can hear me, so cool. At least it did it at the end.
Yeah. We can see you moving around too. So if need
right.
be, we'll we'll edit this after the fact, Sean. All right, then September 27th and September 29th, Sean has pulled some strings and actually put together opportunity for us to get together in person, which I'm super excited about, at Autodesk University. So we'll have 2 live sessions there. Basically no real agenda, just getting to interact with the community and talk about some of the cool stuff that we've seen at AU. Sean, you want to take it over from here?
Indeed. We got a quick well, we don't have the slides right now. I think we can talk to them. I'm going to paste some more links. I'll also put those on the event page. This is different ways to connect with the community. There is the Voices blog, which are customers blogging for other customers. So community helping community, a lot of great stuff in there, from Revit to Dynamo to AutoCAD to Civil 3D, you name it, BIM 360. So stay connected. Hope to see you at AU. We will be live streaming those 2 sessions as well. So be a lot of fun. I guess they're both sold out now. Plus there's a Revit one that sold out. So 3 community conversations at AU. Go out to the calendar, keep an eye for any updates, and add the sessions. And we hope to see you in the future. Oh, there we go. There's the slide. All right, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, John. There'll be a quick, painless little survey at the end when you exit. It does help us when you let us know what you liked, what you'd like to see, and how we can improve. So thank you.